It's 2026 and building mobile applications just keeps getting easier and more fun every single month. Just 2 weeks ago, the Expo team has released SDK 55 in beta and it's about to go stable very soon. So I wanted to make this video breaking down Expo SDK 55, what changed, what actually matters, and what it means for your future React Native applications. This is a pretty big release because we have got architecture changes, a new project structure, performance improvements, more native UI features, and even faster OTA updates. So in this video, I'll walk you through the most important changes in a simple and beginner-friendly way. No complicated jargon, no assumptions, just clear explanations. So hopefully by the end of this video, you will know what changed in SDK 55, why these changes matter, and how these changes will affect the way that you build apps with Expo. And by the way, these release notes that I'm referring to is written by the Expo team, and I will leave the link in the description if you would like to follow along. So now starting off, what's inside Expo SDK 55? Now SDK 55 it ships with React Native 0.83 and React 19.2. So with these versions, right away you are getting the latest improvements from both React and React Native. But the real story of this release is not just version numbers. The real story is about architecture, performance, and more native-like behavior. And we're going to be talking about them one by one in detail. Starting off with the architecture, one of the biggest changes in SDK 55 is that the legacy React Native architecture has been completely removed. In older Expo versions, you had two options, the old architecture and new architecture, and you could even toggle it with a setting like this. Now in SDK 55, this option is completely gone. Only the new architecture is supported. So every Expo application now runs on the modern architecture by default. Now if you're a beginner, this might sound scary, but actually this is great news. Yes, literally great news. Because before there was a confusion like, should I use the new architecture? Is my library compatible? Will this break something? Now, you don't need to think about any of that. You just create your project and you automatically get better performance, more modern native integrations, and a future-proof setup. So this change actually simplifies the developer experience. So in short, the old architecture is gone. We have a new architecture and you don't even need to think about toggling the state because you cannot toggle it, right? By default, you get the best performance out of the box. Now, next we have a new default project structure. In older Expo router projects, your app lived in a folder called app. But in SDK 55 and above, the default structure is now source and then the app folder. So your project will look more like this. Now, you might be wondering, why did they change this in the first place? And the idea is pretty simple actually. This structure is going to separate your application code from the configuration files. It's going to make the project more organized and it's going to scale better for larger applications. Another big change is that native tabs are now the default in new Expo projects. Now before this, most tab navigators were built in JavaScript. They were fully customizable but not truly native. They look like native tabs, but they were actually rendered using JavaScript. Now in SDK 55, Expo uses real native tab bars by default. So this means better performance, more natural animations, a more native look and feel, and less custom styling needed. So when you create a new Expo project, you'll automatically get a native tab experience out of the box. No extra setup, no extra libraries, it just works. Now this also means that on iOS, the liquid glass will work out of the box because as the name suggests, this is using the native tabs. Now the next improvement is about the over-the-air updates, or in short, OTA updates. So for this, Expo introduced Herms bytecode diffing, and I know that sounds very technical, so let's slow down and break it into simple terms. So first off, what is an OTA update in the first place? So essentially, it means that you can update your application's JavaScript code without submitting a new version to the App Store or Play Store. So users just open your application and it updates automatically in the background. Now, here is how it worked before SDK 55. Every time time you pushed an update, the entire JavaScript bundle was downloaded again, even if you only changed one small file, which is pretty inefficient. But now with SDK 55, Expo team added something called bytecode diffing. What this means is that Expo compares the old bundle and the new bundle. It finds only the parts that changed and it sends just those changes to the users. So instead of downloading everything, the user only downloads the difference. So in many cases, updates are around 75% smaller, they download much faster, and they use less data. And to enable this feature, you just need to add this code to your config. If you're a beginner, you don't have to think about this too much, but just know that something like this existed, and once you're about to go to production, then you can come back and take a look at the OTA updates. And then the next update is about the Herms V1 support. Herms or Hermes, I don't know how you pronounce it, but doesn't matter. So if you have never heard of it before, it is basically the JavaScript engine that is used by React Native. Now this is an optional upgrade. If you use it, you're gonna get better performance, faster startup times, and improved support for modern JavaScript. But of course, there is a small trade-off, which is that you have to build React Native from the source and accept longer build times. And here is the what config would look like. But once again, if you're just starting out, you don't need to enable this yet. The default setup is already pretty good. But for larger production apps, this can give you a nice performance boost. So just know that something like this existed, and once you're about to go live, you can just come back to this feature and take a look at the details and decide if you want to use it or not. SDK 55 also adds several native UI capabilities, and these changes are all about making your application feel more like a real native app. So now you get support for Android Material 3 dynamic colors and adaptive iOS system colors. And in simple terms, this means that your application can automatically match the user's system theme, the device accent colors, as well as the light and dark mode. So overall, your application feels more integrated with the operating system. And there is also zoom transitions for iOS. And once again, if we have to put it in simple terms, basically you get these smooth transitions without writing any extra code. And there is also a new native iOS toolbar API. And this gives you a native bottom toolbar, buttons and menus, and an alternative to tab navigation. So instead of always using tabs, you now have more navigation options. And Expo also introduced an experimental feature called split view. This allows multi-panel layouts, better tablet experiences, and more advanced UI structures. You can think of it like iPad apps that show a sidebar on the left and content on the right, and all this happening at the same time. And then there is a new package called Expo Brownfield. This is designed for existing native applications. So in simple terms, it allows you to add Expo into an existing iOS or Android project. I'm not going to get into the details because if you're just getting started out, you don't really need this package. And then there is a new versioning system, which is pretty cool. So here's how that works. Let's say you are using SDK 55. The package version that you're using will also be 55. So in the past, it would look something like, version 15, 23, I don't know, version 5, but now the version will be matching with the SDK that it belongs to. And this makes compatibility much easier to understand, especially for beginners. And next we have iOS widgets, which is in alpha at the moment. So now you can build home screen widgets and live activities. And then the blur component that we have on Android is now stable, faster, and more efficient. Now with all that being said, now let's talk about a few breaking changes that you should know. In SDK 55, push notifications in Expo Go on Android now throw an error, which means that you must use a development build instead. So if you're testing notifications, make sure you're not using Expo Go, but instead you have a development build. And next, the Expo AV module was removed from Expo Go. It has been replaced by Expo Video and Expo Audio. So if you're working with media, you should migrate to these packages. The next big update is that the notification field in app.json is no longer supported. So now you must use the Expo Notifications config plugin instead. SDK 55 also includes improvements for web, such as new error overlay, experimental server-side rendering, and data loaders. Now you might be asking, how do we create a brand new SDK 55 project? Here I just left the commands on the screen depending on your package manager. And if you're wondering how to upgrade an existing project, once again, here is the command that you can see on the screen. Another important addition in SDK 55 is better support for AI-powered development. Now, this is pretty cool because most developers today are already using tools like Cloud Code, Cursor, Codex, and other AI coding assistants. So Expo is leaning into that reality as well. They created an official Expo skills repository with skills for things like building applications, deploying, debugging, and upgrading SDK versions. If you're interested in details, check out the repository with the link in the description. So overall, those are the biggest changes in Expo SDK 55. If we summarize the most important points, I think the list would look like this. The old architecture is gone. Native tabs are now the default. OTA updates are much faster. More native UI features are built in. Herms V1 brings performance improvements. And iOS widgets are now possible, which means that SDK 55 is focused on performance, native feel, simpler defaults, and future-proof architecture. And if you're just starting a new Expo project, this is a great time to jump in. So with all that being said, if you enjoyed this crash course, just let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.